Council, Honorable Minister Simbarashe Mbengewi of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Your Excellency, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and her Deputy, Rastus Moensha, Your Excellencies, Heads of Delegations, Your Excellencies, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Dumelang, Goeiemorgen, Bonjour. Let me reiterate my warm welcome to all of you to South Africa. And let me at the outset once again thank Her Excellency the Chair, the Commissioners, and the Secretariat for the good preparations for our work. To the Excellencies, members of the Executive Council, following our robust engagement in the last 2 days at our retreat, I know we are ready and determined to use the Executive Council effectively to prepare for the necessary decisions by our leaders. I am sure that with the robust discussions, we have set the scene and we have made adequate preparations with a sense of urgency for the meeting of the summit. And the commitment which we took at our retreat, though it was informal, would help us move with professionalism, as we always do, to gear up our leaders, to instruct us to focus on implementation and more implementation as we adopt the 10-year plan of our Agenda 2063. Africa is on the move, with 7 of the fastest growing economies in the world being in our continent, the continent being the repository of all the variety of resources required in minerals for either sustained development or sustained recovery. That time has never been so opportune for us to achieve the objectives of the Africa we want. Your Excellency, Chairperson, our youthful population is no longer a challenge of youth bulge, but it is our youth dividend that uniquely put us on an advantaged point. Therefore, never has the effectiveness of the African Union and the symbiosis between its organs and structures been so critical. This includes the important role that our regional economic communities have played but continue to play, and that they need to come to the party indeed for us to be able to fully implement our 10-year agenda plan. Whether Africa, our continent, seizes this moment or not is dependent on how we as the Executive Council, which is the critical layer of the decision-making process of our African Union work, continue doing our work, as I saw us in our robust debates yesterday, in our informal meetings, the meeting of the retreat. Through us, we resolve not only to implement on Agenda 2063, but also to make sure that we come up with proposals, very firm proposals, on how we should be able to become self-reliant and come up with the necessary resources to fund our plan. As how we would also be looking urgently at the matters of silencing the guns on our continent, as this is one of our aspirations. Your Excellencies, following our interactions at the retreat, I know we are all inspired and ready to work to make it easy for our leaders to conclude their work on a very heavy agenda covering a wide range of issues. With these words, I wish to once again, with all humility, welcome you to your second home, Mzansi, South Africa. Modi Brigade, Asante Sana.
We thank you, Excellency Minister, for your warm welcome. May I respectfully invite Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the AU Commission, for her speech.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Your Excellency, Honorable Simbaratse, Chairperson of the Executive Council, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Honorable Ministers, members of the Executive Council and other ministers who are here, heads of delegations, high-level officials from the capitals, Your Excellency, Deputy Chairperson of the AU Commission, Mr. Erastus Mwencha, and fellow commissioners, Your Excellencies, members of the PRC, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished representatives of international organizations, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow Africans. I warmly welcome you to this 26th ordinary session of the Executive Council during this crispy Gauteng morning. As we gather here in Gauteng, and for those who don't know what Gauteng means, it means the city of gold in one of our languages. The eyes of African women, young and old, from all walks of life, are on this summit and on this executive meeting, held under the theme Women's Empowerment and Development for the Realization of Agenda 2063. Women and girls pin their hopes on the Union to act decisively together with our governments, civil society, faith-based organizations, business associations, the women's and youth movements, to ensure that women everywhere in the continent have access to land, to capital, to clean and affordable energy, to water and sanitation, to jobs and sustainable livelihoods, and to health care. And they expect to participate in all areas of human endeavor. Our girls and young women in particular yearn for opportunities to, along with their brothers, have access to education, including in the vocations, in the areas of science, engineering, technology, research, and innovation. And as one of our ministers like to say, I think the Minister of Botswana, that you deny an African child education, you deny them life. So they are yearning to know that when we come out of these meetings, they will have access to education in particular. During the summit, a number of gender and women's events are therefore being held to merge with the call to action on the empowerment of women, guided by the theme. During the first part of this year, we have already begun to see the mobilization of women by women's movement on such issues as access to land, to capital, financial inclusion, and on the representation of women in all areas of human endeavor. Excellencies, women in Somalia, Central African Republic, Eastern DRC, South Sudan, Darfur, Northern Mali, Northern Nigeria, are yearning for peace for themselves, their children, their families, and communities, to live normal lives, to plow their fields, and to educate their children. These issues highlighted by women are already contained in our instruments, such as the Maputo Gender Protocol and Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality. The challenge, therefore, Excellencies, is that if we continue at the same pace of gender transformation as we did since 1995, Beijing Women's Conference, it will take us another 80 years to reach full gender parity. So as African women and girls and progressive-minded men, we agree that this is unacceptable. We cannot wait for another 80 years. We have to do more to ensure that the continent operates at its full capacity so that we can implement our Agenda 2063 effectively. And of course, the continent cannot operate at full capacity if women are not included. Excellencies, as we indicated earlier in the year, we will therefore launch at this summit the inaugural African Gender Scorecard as an instrument to monitor progress, share best practice, and hold each other accountable. And we would like to thank the ECA, who have worked very hard to make sure that we have this scorecard ready for the summit. Excellencies, during 2014, the year of agriculture, women farmers from across the continent called on us to consign the handheld hoe to the museum and to assist them with access to modern technology, land credit, and extension services. As we speak, the second AU high-level panel on gender with ministers of gender, women from civil society, is in progress under the theme Financial Inclusion, Women in Agribusiness. And we look forward to their recommendations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Council just emerged from a 2-day retreat where we discussed the first 10-year plan of action for Agenda 2063. We also strategized on the challenges of integration with a focus on free movement of people and goods, as well as harmonization of higher education in Africa. Trade amongst African countries remain below global standards. Although a number of regions through their economic communities are making progress, especially in the East African community, SADC, ECOWAS, COMESA, the trade agreement reached by the latter 3 RECs yesterday, and the launch of the African Continental Free Trade negotiations this year are therefore all aimed at growing trade amongst ourselves and therefore jobs and creation of wealth. The Council retreat recognized that Agenda 2063 priorities including the African Skills Revolution, connectivity, the continent through transport, energy, ICT infrastructure, are critical enablers, increasing economic integration and shared prosperity. We must therefore continue to push ahead with progress on these matters. Our discussion on the harmonization of higher education were prompted by the calls from across the continent by students and young professionals and entrepreneurs who expressed forcefully during the Agenda 2063 consultations that they want to be able to study, work, and have their qualifications recognized everywhere in the continent. We must therefore move faster to ensure that higher education in Africa is comparable and compatible with recognition of credentials that facilitate transferability of skills, knowledge, and expertise. We want to ensure that African citizens, especially our young people, can use their qualifications and work anywhere in Africa. A related matter is therefore our continental discussions on speeding up the free movement of people and goods. Within REX, we see a lot of progress of movement of people and goods. But between and amongst REX, we don't see that. So I think the challenge is to transfer the good examples, the best practice that we see within REX to then be transferred between and amongst REX. We must therefore keep in mind the concerns of the majority of our continent's population, our young men and women, for access to opportunities and a voice. Excellencies, the challenge of xenophobia and the tragedy of thousands of Africans undertaking perilous journeys across the seas, looking for greener pastures, has to motivate us to speed up the implementation of our Agenda 2063 so that the Africans, especially the young people, can indeed be able to have skills on our continent, have jobs on our continent, and only move across the seas when they want to move, not because they have to move. It is therefore important that we move with speed on the skills revolution, especially vocational training, especially in all the areas of STEM. This will also help us to industrialize and build manufacturing so that we stop exporting the jobs and revenue along with the raw materials we continue to export. We must empower our young people to contribute as innovators, entrepreneurs, manufacturers, traders, scientists, investors, professionals, farmers, and also become the drivers of our transformation. Excellencies, we have just returned from the World Summit on the Ocean, and it was indeed an illuminating experience for me. The Deputy Chair of the Commission likes to say that when he's talking in the context of African integration and Maritime Strategy 2050, that Africa is a large island with smaller island states. All the matters discussed at this Ocean Summit therefore impact on Africa, but there were very few African countries present at that summit. The blue economy includes both economic aspects as well as environmental concerns for marine life and against pollution of the oceans with plastics and many other pollutants. A few months ago, the first ever Women in Maritime Africa conference was held in Luanda, Angola, to mobilize women in this sector and look at Pan-African cooperation to ensure greater African ownership and participation. We also know that a number of African countries have or are in the progress of looking at the establishment of centers for maritime studies to increase the number of African skills and research in this area. Excellencies, I want to also remind you that on the 25th of July this year, in accordance with our African Maritime Strategy 2015, we will 2050, we will launch the start of the Decade of African Oceans and Seas. As an important step towards the continent's reclaiming its ownership of this critical part of our natural resources and managing it in the interest of Africans, including future generations. We shall have a central event to launch this decade, but we also encourage all our coastal countries and their islands and countries with waterways to organize events that focus on African oceans, seas, lakes, and other waterways. Excellencies, I want to conclude by saying that the adoption of the 10-year plan of action for Agenda 2063 will take us to the next step, which will be implementation. And in the coming year, we will be attending to those issues that are important for the implementation of this 10-year plan. But it will also help to move our unstoppable quest for a peaceful, integrated, prosperous, and people-centered Africa that takes its rightful place in the world. So I wish this executive meeting very fruitful discussions and hope that it takes us to the next step in our quest for a prosperous Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency Chairperson. Je voudrais maintenant inviter très respectueusement son Excellence Dr Carlos Lopez, secrétaire général adjoint des Nations Unies et secrétaire exécutif de la CEA, pour son allocution.
Madame la ministre Maïté Nkwana Mashaban, Monsieur le ministre Simbarache Mbembengui, notre président, Madame Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, présidente de la Commission de l'Union africaine, ma sœur, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Monsieur le vice-président et les membres du collège des commissaires de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, il y a quelques semaines, alors que je me rendais de Diridawa à Harar, ville historique de l'Est de l'Éthiopie, j'ai vu un minibus sur la vitre arrière duquel était inscrit un message qui m'a intrigué. Il disait ceci: « Si vous ne voyez pas mes rétroviseurs, je ne peux pas vous voir. » Ce message amusant m'a fait longuement réfléchir et je me suis rendu compte qu'il constituait une merveilleuse métaphore du moment de notre continent. Jour après jour, nous nous efforçons de limiter l'effet de toute mauvaise nouvelle susceptible de perturber un nouveau récit légitime qui réaffirmera l'Afrique nouvelle. face au scepticisme de tant de faiseurs d'opinion du grand public, la tâche est parfois ingrate. C'est pourtant une tâche qu'aucun virus Ebola, aucun Boko Haram, aucune élection irrégulière ou autre chute de cours de produits de base ne devrait nous décourager d'accomplir. Cela fait trop longtemps que nous devons sentir l'urgence qu'il y a à nous bâtir un avenir commun. Ce n'est pas nouveau et cela requiert une capacité d'agir renouvelée, comme l'ont bien exprimé les manifestations organisées pour marquer le 50e anniversaire de l'institution mère de l'Afrique, l'Union africaine. Beaucoup ne nous voient pas encore venir parce que leurs rétroviseurs sont cachés. De notre côté, nous, Africains, nous pouvons aller de l'avant ou dépasser ce minibus métaphorique que j'évoquais tout à l'heure, que si nous faisons en sorte que les autres nous voient et comprennent ce que nous allons faire, ce que nous considérons comme notre devoir. Je suis convaincu que la construction de l'avenir de l'Afrique bénéficiera forcément de l'action des Africains eux-mêmes. En soi, cela ne signifie pas nécessairement que cette construction sera pilotée par les Africains. Ce qui importe, c'est en réalité la nuance entre faire partie et être le moteur de la transformation de sa propre réalité. Après tant de souffrances et d'occasions manquées, l'heure est venue pour l'Afrique de se réapproprier son avenir. Je vois au moins 3 impératifs qui justifient un appel à l'action. L'impératif historique, l'impératif du développement et l'impératif moral. Ladies and gentlemen, the roots of contemporary pessimism or skepticism about Africa's prospects are old. Suffice to say that during the European Renaissance, many authors and thinkers contributed to firming up various papal bulls that gave the right for colonization to the explorer kings, all the way to the diminishing portraying of blacks in the works of famous painters such as Pigafetta, Rubens, Velázquez, or Rigaud. The depiction of the region in the still used Mercator scale maps, or the philosophical construct that Egypt was detached from the rest of the continent. Hegel, the German philosopher, captured the essence of the message by proclaiming that Africans had no history before the arrival of the Europeans. The spread of slavery, the other historical denial, fragmented identities definition with ethnic classification and physical anthropology dealing with diversity as if it was an entomological challenge. These were some of the dire consequences of such contempt. For this audience, what followed is familiar. The response to is well celebrated. Africans have shown over the past 5 decades an agency that has ridden the continent from the shackles of brutal exploitation and discrimination. If in 2013 there was a pause for reflection, it was because too much celebration makes one dizzy. If in 2013 there was a pause for reflection, it was because too much celebration makes one dizzy. If we grow, have less conflicts, expand democratic processes, increase women's participation, claim more control over our own resources, we are fine, aren't we? No, we are not. And one good demonstration of it is the fact that the pessimistic and skeptical view prevails outside and in many instances inside Africa. That is the reason we have a historical imperative to change not just our reality, but also the perceptions about our reality. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an accepted principle that ownership is central to the success of any enterprise undertaken by Homo sapiens. Ownership is essential to overcome the problems of agency in any strategy, program, or project that requires implementation. If Africa does not take ownership of its own development trajectory, then either others will do, or worse still, the future of the continent will be left to the vagaries of chance. Africa must avoid the dangers and pitfalls inherent in adopting received paradigms wholesale. It cannot continue to fall prey to different and sometimes ulterior motives of some actors in the international scene, be they governments, international organizations, multinational corporations, or even well-intentioned international NGOs. For Africa to determine its own future, the thinking underpinning its political, economic, and social development must come from the continent and its diaspora. Of course, this is a contentious point, in the sense that generation or use of knowledge should not be constrained by geographical or indeed psychological barriers. After all, ownership of ideas is nonsensical. What matters, in fact, is ownership of a different kind, since all ideas, learning, and knowledge are welcome, no matter where they come from. The experience of structural adjustment programs in Africa has shown that there are merits in policy flowing from the indigenization of knowledge. Many induced frameworks displayed great ignorance about the state of African economies and their institutional underpinnings. What is perhaps of even greater concern is that while African countries were struggling to get the prices right, countries in East Asia were doing the precise opposite and obtaining stellar results in economic transformation. Thus, while the late 80s and 90s came to be known as Africa's lost decades, the East Asian economies were becoming manufacturing powerhouses which created employment and improved social conditions for their people. They also became incredible exporting machines that took great advantage of unilateral trade liberalization and concomitant de-industrialization in Africa. In other words, countries that have been successful in terms of development determine their own future. If Africans do not occupy the policy space vacated in the recent past, thanks to the various crises that shook the pillars of the financial system and facilitated the emergence of new South engines of growth, they may not have another chance. This makes the case for a development imperative. Ladies and gentlemen, it is also vital for Africa to determine its own future because of the responsibility that the current generation must have to future generations. If current trends remain the same, Africa is projected to have the most youthful population in the world within the next 50 years. It would certainly be wrong, given the current opportunities of above average growth, to bequeath the legacy of a laggard continent to future generations. This becomes even more unconscionable if we consider that we are using up the mineral wealth and natural resources of the continent and its oceans at a very fast rate. As the rest of the world gears up to adapt to megatrends arising from demographic, technological, and environmental shifts, it is imperative that our generation should set Africa on track for sustained and sustainable development. Ownership and a sense of intertemporal responsibility are, however, not enough for Africa to determine its own future. Vision is also required. This is quite easily demonstrated from the sphere of private business, where second generations have inherited the family business and run it aground because they lack the vision and entrepreneurship of the founders. I should make it very clear at this stage that Africa has not lacked visionaries. This continent has also had its share of frameworks which in many ways were attempts to encapsulate a vision for its future, such as the Lagos Plan of Action, the Abuja Treaty, or NEPAD. The challenge all along has been that the vision were not accompanied by continental frameworks, but were instead implemented at the national level. Similarly, as its name implies, a document like the Lagos Plan of Action was not intended as a vision document. Thus, while it contained uplifting language about self-reliance, it was not underpinned by an all-encompassing vision. More critical, however, is that it was not given the opportunity to be implemented due to the competing and perhaps more powerful external forces that imposed a different pathway for Africa's development. That worldview saw the African state and its primary tool of planning as being at the very root of the economic problems facing the continent. The response, therefore, was to roll back the state, abandon planning, and get the prices right. Ladies and gentlemen, is this time around any different? Following the 2008-2009 debacle, it became clear that the response to economic crisis, and indeed to development, had to be more nuanced and diverse. Blueprints with universal ambition have died. What the Keynesians and their East Asian adherents had known all along about the positive and mutually reinforcing role of the state and markets suddenly became clear to all and sundry. For its part, Africa weathered the storm of the global crisis better than most, and the narrative shifted from that of a hopeless continent to that of Africa rising. This was the background against which the African Union celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2013. Africa's leaders felt that it was important to build on current progress while fully cognizant of lessons of the past, and accordingly adopted Agenda 2063 as the long-term vision for continental development. Given that Agenda 2063 arose from wide-ranging consultations with all sectors of society and relevant stakeholders, it must be seen as an improvement from the past. However, no matter how extensive, consultations do not by themselves lead to high-quality plan documents or even less implementation. This is important because, as of yet, there are no grounds for over-enthusiasm. Indeed, average growth of 5% since the beginning of the century has still not translated into decent jobs and the elimination of large pockets of poverty and pervasive inequality. The negative perceptions about Africa will catch up with the wonderful intentions, once again, if we do not construct a reality that matches the aspirations of the continent, particularly its too much neglected youth and women. This is the moral imperative. Ladies and gentlemen, in my view, the most important component of Agenda 2063 is the clear commitment to structural transformation of the continent. Put simply, Africa must industrialize for sustained growth and to generate jobs and extract maximum value addition from its natural resources. This in turn requires credible macroeconomic frameworks, infrastructural development, and adequate financing. We must remember, while articulating macroeconomic frameworks, to underpin structural transformation, that the benefits of austerity are at best short-term and sometimes even damaging to the very foundations of such structural transformation. The important role of infrastructure in supporting structural transformation is quite clear from the physical evidence around us and the plethora of initiatives that have been launched to attract and ensure financing for infrastructure projects, especially power, rail, road, and aviation that underpin Agenda 2063. To be viable and indeed useful, these projects must be of a transnational, regional nature. There are two challenges to be overcome in this regard. The first relates to ensuring a harmonized policy and regulatory environment for such investments. The second challenge pertains to the paying for all these projects, while at the same time raising resources for investment in farms, factories, and for the delivery of social services. We have seen various initiatives in this regard, ranging from the study undertaken by NEPAD agency and ECA on domestic resource mobilization to the focus during the 9th African Development Forum on innovative financing for Africa's development. In addition, the findings of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa continue to gain traction. As an important part of taking its destiny in its own hands, Africa should take advantage of hosting the 3rd International Conference on Financing for Development in Addis Ababa to advance its interests through the outcomes of the meeting. Another key global initiative that will affect Africa's long-term aspirations is the expected adoption of a post-2015 development agenda and a set of sustainable development goals. While Africa has adopted a common position, the outcome of global process might not fully mirror the continent's concerns. Accordingly, it is essential to ensure as much coherence as possible so there are no distractions and unnecessary dissipation of energies in the process of implementation. This is a sensitive point because of the continuing reliance on aid as a central tenet. If not properly overhauled, aid can distract priorities. While the aspirations in Agenda 2063 is for a politically united continent, the reality is that we still have 54 different countries and 8 recognized regional economic groupings. As a result, it is vital to ensure that the continental agenda is well synchronized with existing national and sub-regional plans and development strategies. We should in this regard celebrate the landmark signing of the tripartite free trade agreement in Cairo yesterday between SADC, EAC, and COMESA. 50 years is a long time, and many things can change during such period. It is therefore very wise for Africa to have taken the decision to break up Agenda 2063 into 10-year development plans and reinforce the process through a monitoring tool such as set in the Africa Development Goals as called for during the January 2014 AU Summit. The implementation of Agenda 2063 requires concerted action by all African stakeholders, taking ownership and again intertemporal responsibility and implementing this vision is a dedicated and focused manner will enable Africa to shape and determine its own destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, the message on the rear window of the minivan was for all of us to see and for those who drive by. In our case, our leaders are driving. If they cannot see the mirrors of the minivan, the message is that they are not seen either. They can have an accident. They can miss the overtaking. They can keep driving slowly behind the front car. They can fall asleep. They can just accept their bad luck and change their plans and arrive late. Or they can make themselves seen and, more importantly, felt. If the latter happens, it means they have understood Africa's imperative to determine its own future. Thank you.
Nous vous remercions, Excellence. It's now my privilege to respectfully invite Honorable Simbarashe Mubengengwi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Zimbabwe and Chairperson of the Executive Council, for the opening speech.
Your Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, Honorable Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, Maite Nkoana Mashavane, Your Excellency, Dr. Carlos Lopez, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, members of the Executive Council, honorable ministers of the African Union member states, members of the Permanent Representative Committee and other senior government officials, members of the Diplomatic Corps, heads of regional economic communities, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. I wish to welcome you, honorable ministers, to the 27th session, ordinary session of the Executive Council. Let me express my profound gratitude and appreciation to the government and people of the Republic of South Africa for the warm welcome and the usual legendary hospitality accorded to me and my delegation since our arrival in this bustling cosmopolitan city of Johannesburg. The excellent state-of-the-art facilities placed at our disposal provide us with the environment necessary for conducting our deliberations in preparation for the Assembly. I wish to thank the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, and through her, all African Union Commission staff for the sterling preparatory work. Your critical role in facilitating the functioning of our Union and its organs is fully appreciated. Let me commend the Permanent Representative Committee for their efforts and diligence in preparing for this meeting. Honorable Ministers, we held our second ministerial retreat on the 9th and 10th of June 2015, during which we successfully deliberated on the first 10-year implementation plan of the African Union Agenda 2063 and its financing mechanisms, the streamlining and improving of methods of work and the rules of procedure of the African Union. In relation to streamlining and improving the working of our Union, one cannot overemphasize the importance of according ample time to our heads of state and government to attend to issues that are strategic to our continent. In line with this, it is imperative to review the working methods and rules of procedure of other organs of the Union in order to enhance their efficiency, effectiveness in the discharge of their various mandates. Honorable Ministers, as you will recall, the Assembly at its 24th Ordinary Session held in January 2015 in Addis Ababa took the strategic decision to progressively increase Member States' funding of the Union to make sure that at the end of 5 years, starting from 2016, Member States will be financing 100% of the operational budget, at least 75% of the program's budget, and at least 25% of its peacekeeping operations budget. That decision inevitably brings with it added responsibilities for Member States, particularly in the area of assessed contributions. The decision was not only necessary, but was an important step taken by our principals to ensure African control over and ownership of the Union and its programs' activities. We all know the old adage, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And this becomes extremely relevant in our situation. It is therefore imperative that we seek alternative sources of financing the Union. Our organization should take the measures to ensure that we operate within the confines of our budget. This would enable the Union to avoid overdependence on our cooperating partners. Honorable Ministers, as we conduct our deliberations, let us also remember the challenges that are facing our great continent. In so doing, let us take heart in the knowledge that none of these challenges are insurmountable. Africa, through the African Union Commission, took the lead to fight against Ebola, together with the support of the African private sector. This was no mean achievement, as it showed that we can achieve unity with purpose. Further, it was a clear demonstration of the desire and readiness of the African private sector to participate directly in the development of Africa. Dear colleagues, I would like to emphasize the need to institute strong follow-up mechanisms as we prepare ourselves for the implementation of the first 10-year plan of Agenda 2063. There is an old Chinese saying which goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. We have already taken that decisive step, first step. The journey over the next 50 years will be long and may even be riddled with many hurdles which we must overcome together as we move towards our desired destination. With our collective knowledge, wisdom, and political will, we should be able to achieve what is envisaged in the Agenda 2063 blueprint. Honorable Ministers, the African Union theme for 2015 is Year of Women Empowerment and Development towards Africa's Agenda 2063. It is noteworthy that more than half of the population on the continent are women. They form the backbone of our nations, our regions, and indeed our continent at large. It is therefore only logical to conclude that no sustainable development can take place without the input and involvement of African women. It is important that we embark on the implementation of the Agenda 2063 blueprint. We ensure that the most important factor in our development process, the women and indeed the youth, are given pride of place, not as an act of charity, but as a clear recognition of their essential role in the actualization of the 7 aspirations under the Agenda 2063 blueprint. To lead us to an Africa that is, as we always say, integrated, prosperous, peaceful, and driven by its citizens, and representing a dynamic force in the international arena. Honorable Ministers, it is now my singular honor to declare this 27th ordinary session of the Executive Council officially open. I thank you.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, distingués invités, le discours du président du Conseil exécutif marque la fin de la cérémonie d'ouverture. Tout en remerciant nos distingués invités, les observateurs, pour leur participation à cette cérémonie d'ouverture, signe de leur intérêt dans nos activités, je vais les prier de bien vouloir se retirer pour nous permettre de continuer nos travaux à huis clos. So that was the end of the opening ceremony. We thank you, all the distinguished observers and invited guests. So we are going to start the closed session with the member states only. Après. The media can run downstairs. I think you know the site for the group photo on the ground floor. Je vais annoncer. Juste à côté. Non, c'est en bas. À quel ground étage? Ground zero. Il faut annoncer un peu. Non, il faut que les observateurs partent. Ils ne vont pas se bousculer avec.